Hi, my Alderson Eagles. It has been a long time since we have done any social studies. So, before we get into what our new unit is going to be, I just want to do a quick review, kind of refresh your memory. So, remember, we're talking about Texas history. So, what we're really focusing on is what's happening in Texas and how different events in the United States have affected Texas. Okay. So let's start off with Texas winning its independence. So remember, Mexico was ruling over Texas. We had Santa Anna, who was this dictator who really wanted Texans to do what people in Mexico were doing. So Santa Anna did not like that Texans were not speaking Spanish, that they weren't doing the Mexican customs, that they were really living like Americans in Texas. And so he really didn't like this. And this kind of starts the Texas Revolution, where they're fighting Mexico to gain their independence. Eventually, Texas wins their independence and they become their own country. So they have their own president. They have only three presidents, if we remember who those were. We have Sam Houston, and then we have Marabou B. Lamar, who is also known as our Texas, what is his name? The father of Texas education. And then Sam Houston comes back and is president one more time before the United States is annexed or joined into the United States. Texas is annexed into the United States. Um, but it wasn't just as easy as Texas joining the United States. A lot of Americans didn't want Texas to be annexed because, remember, they had slaves. And so this is the point in history where the South is really, really focused on agriculture and they believe that they need these slaves as their workforce. And the North is more industrial. So they have factories, they have all these machines. They don't really have agriculture, so they don't really have a need for slaves. And so these two, the North and the South, are going to fight back and forth about what's right. Eventually, Texas is annexed into the United States with some stipulations. And one of these stipulations being that they have to pay off their debt coming from the Mexican War. And so the United States isn't going to pay this debt. Also, Texas gets to come in as a slave state, so they get to keep their slaves. As time goes on, the South kind of rebels after Abraham Lincoln becomes president. Abraham Lincoln was very, very against slavery. He wanted to abolish slavery, and people in the South did not like this because remember, slaves is what helped them make their money. And so the South decides to secede or leave the United States. And so the South becomes their own country, the Confederacy, and this leads to the Civil War. In the Civil War, the North and the South are fighting against each other, essentially over if they are allowed to own slaves or not. And as we can all tell, since slavery is now illegal, the North wins. They have kind of gathered up pieces of the South as time goes on, and now the United States is put back together as a country that does not support slaves. Right before we left for spring break, remember we were talking kind of about these cattle trails. And so Texas is in a lot of debt. Remember, they fought the Mexican War and they still owe money from that. They also fought in the Civil War and also owe money for that. And so Texans are super broke and they need money. And so what they kind of do is look around and they're like, what do we have a lot of? And they have a lot of cattle that the Spanish had brought over and kind of abandoned, and now there's just wild cattle running around everywhere. They know that in the north there is a huge demand for beef, and so this starts the cattle trails. Texans are, taking these cattle and they have to travel up north because there's no trains in the south. And they're taking these cattle and moving them up north where they can ship them and get money for all of this cattle. Okay. Eventually, time goes on, and the invention of barbed wire puts a stop to these cattle trails because these cowboys cannot freely travel through land and they can't freely take these cattle. And so that kind of dies down. And so that's going to bring us to what our new unit is today, which is super exciting. I think a lot of you guys have heard a lot about it, but haven't really learned the ins and outs of it. And so what we're going to be covering is World War One. And this is going to be also known as the Great War, because unlike the Civil War, where it's just the United States fighting against the United States, or America fighting for their independence, where it's just Britain against the United States, this World War, kind of like how the name sounds, is going to be a lot of different countries fighting a lot of different countries. Okay. So, where we need to start is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And so he's kind of like the leader in Hungary. And what happens is he's assassinated, which means he is killed for political reasons. And this kind of propels the world into this war. What we really need to focus on is two things, because this is how the United States gets involved. It's going to be the sinking of the Lusitania and also the Zimmermann telegraph. And the sinking of the Lusitania is going to be this British cruise ship. It's just like if you were going to go on a cruise and it was going to be super fun, that's what this boat was. And what Germany does is attacks and sinks this cruise ship. And on this ship, there's not any soldiers. It's just regular people going on a vacation. And so the United States really does not like that. And they kind of start thinking about joining this war that they weren't previously in. The second thing that really gets the United States to be like, oh yeah, we're going to join this world war is going to be the Zimmermann telegraph. And so before there were phones, before there were text messages, what we had was telegraphs. And these are just going to be like short messages that you can send, across the ocean to different countries. And what Germany does is they send this telegraph. It's like a little bitty note that's telling Mexico, hey, if you join our side, then we can promise you a couple of things. If you become our ally or our friend, we will give you Texas back, we will give you Arizona back, and we will give you New Mexico back when we win the war. Well, what happens is the United States intercepts or stops this message from going to Mexico, and they read it and they see that Germany is kind of promising land that doesn't belong to them to Mexico. And so the United States are kind of forced to join World War One. And World War One is a very, very different war because of, I told you that it's not just two countries fighting each other, but a bunch of different countries fighting a bunch of different countries. But this is also going to be the first modern war where we have things like tanks, we have things like machine guns. We have all this different technology that's going to make this war more deadly than other wars, right? Think about how many more people you can injure with a machine gun than you can with just a cannon, okay? This is also going to be the start of trench warfare, where both sides are digging like these big holes, and people are hiding in these holes and fighting back and forth and shooting back and forth, which really is going to prolong or make this war even longer. So I am super excited to start World War One. This is just an introduction. You will have your assignments in Google Classroom. There's going to be a Google Slides. You'll click on the assignments for the day. Remember, you just work on this in your own time, as long as it's done by the next Monday. If you have any questions about the assignments or what I've talked about so far, you can hop on Zoom on Wednesday for my office hours. I love all of you. Work hard, and I'll see you soon.